A limestone lamp flickers deep within the darkness of a French cave. 17,000 years of soot stain the jagged cavern walls. A glob of rendered horse fat bubbles inside the stone basin. A charred juniper wick sputters, struggling against the suffocating damp. This was not a primitive campfire, but the dawn of human night management. The fire did not just illuminate the void, it forced the darkness to retreat. Dr. Sophie A. DeBone examined these artifacts in the Lascaux cave complex. She identified the residue of reindeer and horse fat lining the stone bowls. The Paleolithic inhabitants did not rely on chance to survive the dark. They engineered a portable, reliable source of light using animal remains. The technology was crude but effective for the deep interior of the caves. To understand why this mattered, you need to see how fundamentally it altered the human experience. For the first time, the natural cycle of the sun no longer dictated human activity. The cave walls became a canvas, illuminated by the steady glow of animal grease. Archaeologists found hundreds of these lamps scattered across the site. Each one represented a deliberate effort to extend the hours of human labor and ritual. The transition from natural light to artificial fire required a constant supply of fuel. Highlanders and cave dwellers alike learned to render fat into a stable, combustible paste. They experimented with various fibrous materials to serve as long-burning wicks. The juniper branch proved superior to other local plants for this purpose. It held the flame steady despite the drafts moving through the limestone tunnels. The reality was that these light sources were the first step in a long industrial journey. They were the ancestors of every candle, gas lamp, and electric bulb that followed. The mastery of fire allowed humans to inhabit environments that were otherwise uninhabitable. The darkness was no longer a wall, but a space waiting to be occupied. But the true cost of this illumination would only be measured in the centuries that followed. Ancient Egyptian tomb paintings captured the first attempts to conquer the dark. Reeds harvested from the Nile riverbanks served as the primary wick. Artisans peeled back the outer skin to expose the soft, fibrous pith. These rushlights were dipped repeatedly into vats of rendered animal fat. They burned with a sputtering, greasy flame that filled small rooms with smoke. The Egyptians also engineered shallow bowls, fueled by castor or sesame oil. These lamps were simple terracotta vessels, with a pinched rim for a wick. But to understand how this became a global standard, you must look at Italy. Excavations in the ruins of Pompeii uncovered thousands of mass-produced lamps. These volute lamps utilized standardized molds to ensure uniform production. Roman workshops churned out these terracotta devices by the tens of thousands. Every household, from the wealthy villa to the cramped apartment, owned one. They were fueled by olive oil, a commodity that fueled the Roman economy. The design featured a small reservoir and a protruding nozzle for the wick. This standardization turned light from a rare luxury into a basic household utility. The streets of Pompeii were not illuminated, but the interior life was transformed. Archaeologists found these lamps in kitchens, bedrooms, and even public bathhouses. The Roman state realized that light was a necessary component of daily productivity. Mass production allowed even the common laborer to extend his day past sunset. The volute lamp was the first true consumer technology of the ancient world. It established a rhythm of life that persisted for over 1,000 years. The light was dim, and the oil was expensive for the average citizen. Yet, the shift towards standardized, repeatable illumination had permanently begun. The Roman Empire spread this technology across the Mediterranean and into northern Europe. Every Roman colony relied on these ceramic vessels to stave off the night. The technology remained largely unchanged until the fall of the Western Empire. But the demand for consistent, portable light never faded from the human record. Peasant families across medieval Europe eventually returned to the simple rushlight. They soaked the pith of the Juncus effusus rush in bacon or mutton fat. These makeshift candles required constant attention in every dark, drafty cottage. A single rushlight burned for only 20 to 30 minutes at a time. The cycle of lighting and replacing defined the nocturnal labor of the poor. It was a primitive, exhausting process that kept the household tethered to the flame. The reality was that for centuries, light was a tether rather than a tool. The struggle to maintain the flame was the primary labor of the evening. But the transition from the simple rushlight to industrial gas was already approaching. The standardized Roman lamp was merely the first hint of a commodified night. The medieval cottage existed in a state of perpetual twilight. Peasants across Europe spent the centuries between 500 and 1500 CE battling the encroaching dark. The Juncus effusus rush served as their primary technology for illumination. Families harvested these common wetland plants from the muddy banks of local streams. They peeled back the tough outer green skin with a sharp iron knife. This process exposed the soft, white pith hidden within the stalk. The pith acted as a wick for the rendered fats of the farmstead. Women dipped the prepared rushes into vats of cooling bacon or mutton grease. The resulting rushlight hardened into a stiff, greasy rod of plant fiber. They placed these rods into spring-loaded iron clips, known as rushlight holders. A single rushlight burned for only 20 to 30 minutes at a time. The flame sputtered with a thick, acrid smoke that clung to the thatch ceilings. Every half hour the light died, plunging the room back into total darkness. The cycle of lighting and replacing defined the nightly labor of the poor. The constant maintenance of the flame left little time for rest or reflection. Families huddled around these flickering points of light to perform essential evening tasks. They spun wool, repaired leather tools, or prepared the grain for the morning meal. The need for a constant, reliable source of light tethered every soul to the hearth. This was not a choice, but a requirement of survival in the drafty, uninsulated cottages. The reality was that the night remained a period of exhausting, repetitive work. Historians recognize the rushlight as the backbone of the medieval domestic economy. It provided just enough visibility to prevent accidents in the crowded living spaces, yet it kept the household in a state of constant, low-level anxiety. The smell of burning animal fat permeated the clothes and hair of the peasantry. Archaeological records show the prevalence of these iron holders in rural excavations. Each one represented a desperate attempt to push back the boundaries of the night. The rushlight was a blunt instrument against the vast, impenetrable dark of the Middle Ages. But to understand why this cycle of maintenance mattered, you must look at the human body. The biological rhythm of the era was not the unbroken slumber seen in modern times. The constant interruption of the rushlight mirrored a deeper, segmented approach to the night. This was the rhythm of a world that had not yet learned to conquer the darkness. The Atlantic Ocean held the key to the next evolution of light. Nantucket, Massachusetts became the epicenter of this global shift in the 1750s. The island's whaling fleet targeted the Physeter macrocephalus, the massive sperm whale. Within the whale's head lay a reservoir of clear, oily liquid. This substance was called spermaceti. When refined, it turned into a hard, white, waxy material. Candles made from spermaceti burned with a steady, brilliant flame. They produced almost no smoke and emitted no foul, lingering odor. Wealthy homes replaced their sputtering tallow candles with these superior products. But the price of this light was paid in blood on the open sea. The whaling industry demanded long voyages into the most dangerous waters on Earth. Ship logs from the era recorded the brutal reality of the hunt. The whales were intelligent, powerful, and often fought back against the wooden vessels. One specific logbook detailed the destruction of the whaling ship Essex in 1820. A massive sperm whale rammed the hull in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The ship shattered and sank within minutes of the impact. The crew drifted in small whaleboats for months across thousands of miles of water. Their records describe the starvation and desperation that followed the wreck. This was the extreme human cost of the era's elite illumination. The demand for cleaner light fueled a relentless global expansion of the whaling fleet. Every spermaceti candle in a London or Boston parlor represented a lethal encounter at sea. The industry reached its peak in the mid-19th century. It transformed the nocturnal habits of the wealthy by banishing the smell of burning fat. Yet the darkness remained a constant, deadly adversary for the men in the boats. The transition to spermaceti proved that society valued consistent light over human safety. The logic of commerce had begun to dictate the physical environment of the home. The elite now possessed the ability to extend their evenings with a clean, white flame. This shift set the stage for the total erasure of the old, natural rhythms. The whaling ships were the industrial precursors to the gas-lit city streets. They proved that light could be commodified and transported across the entire globe. The cost was not just financial, but biological and physical. The world was preparing to trade the ancient segmented night for a new artificial order. The darkness of the pre-industrial world dictated a strange, forgotten rhythm for the human body. Historian A. Roger Ekirch spent decades combing through thousands of primary sources from the 16th to the 19th century. He discovered a pattern that vanished from the human experience as the factories rose. The diaries, court records, and medical texts of the era described a practice now known as segmented sleep. People did not sleep in one long, unbroken stretch as they do today. They divided their nights into two distinct 4-hour blocks. These periods were known as the first sleep and the second sleep. A deep silence fell over the countryside as the sun dipped below the horizon. Households retired to their beds shortly after dusk to begin the first sleep. The body entered a state of rest that lasted until roughly midnight. Then, the world woke up. The transition was standard, deliberate, and entirely normal. Tobias Venner, an English physician, documented this phenomenon in his 1620 medical text, Via recta ad vitam longum. He advised his readers on the proper management of the body during these hours. The interval between the two sleeps was an active, productive time. People rose from their beds in the cold air of the middle of the night. They moved through their homes by the fading light of a dying hearth. The watch was the term used for this brief period of wakefulness. Some spent these hours in silent prayer. Others read books by the light of a single candle. Neighbors visited one another to share news or perform domestic chores. The records show that people used this time to prepare the morning grain. They mended tools or tended to the livestock in the nearby barns. This was not a medical disorder or a sign of insomnia. It was the natural circadian rhythm of a world without electric light. Roger Ekirch found evidence of this practice across every social class. Peasants and aristocrats alike followed the two-sleep cycle for centuries. The night was not a void to be feared, but a time of human activity. The second sleep began only after the watch concluded. The body returned to the bed for a final 4-hour rest until the dawn. This pattern allowed the human mind to process the day in two distinct phases. It was a biological reality that defined the human experience for generations. But the arrival of artificial illumination began to compress these hours. The industrial age demanded a different, more continuous cycle of labor. The watch slowly disappeared as the night became a target for productivity. The quiet, reflective hours of the middle of the night were the first casualties of the modern age. The records of the 17th century painted a portrait of a world that never truly went dark. Diaries kept by English families in the 1600s described the routine of the watch as a fundamental domestic obligation. A typical household stirred near midnight when the first sleep ended. The silence of the countryside was broken by the sound of a flint striking steel. Frail light bloomed as a rushlight caught the flame. Family members rose from their beds to navigate the dark rooms of their stone cottages. Cold air rushed through the drafty corridors of rural homes. Men and women moved with the practiced ease of those who knew every floorboard by heart. The watch was not a time for restless pacing or frantic worry. It was a window of quiet, deliberate productivity that lasted for nearly 2 hours. Roger Ekirch discovered that the practice transcended the boundaries of social status. Both wealthy merchants and humble farmhands observed the interval with the same regularity. The activities were as varied as the lives of the people who performed them. Devout individuals used the watch for silent prayer or the reading of religious texts. Small groups of neighbors gathered in local kitchens to share news from the village. Women attended to domestic chores that required steady hands and calm minds. The rhythmic grinding of grain provided a constant low-frequency hum during the deep hours of the night. Tools were mended by the flickering glow of a single candle. Livestock in the nearby barns were checked for signs of distress or cold. These actions were documented in court records as standard, acceptable behaviors. No one considered the wakeful period to be a symptom of a medical disorder. It was a biological reality that aligned the human body with the natural transition of the seasons. The medical community of the era treated the watch as a healthy component of the human experience. Tobias Venner noted in his 1620 text that the interval provided a necessary break for the body. He viewed the time as a bridge between the two phases of rest. The second sleep began only after the watch concluded. The body returned to the warmth of the bed for a final 4-hour cycle until the break of dawn. This pattern allowed the human mind to process the events of the day in two distinct halves. The practice survived for generations because it worked within the constraints of a world without electricity. But to understand why that moment mattered, you need to see how the night was about to be reclaimed. The watch was a period of human agency in the heart of the darkness. It was a time when the night belonged to the people, not the state or the factory. The records show a culture that lived in harmony with the cycle of the sun. The transition to a continuous 8-hour sleep pattern was still centuries away. For now, the night remained a space for reflection and quiet communal life. Every action during the watch was a documented piece of a forgotten human rhythm. The flickering lights of the watch were the last true remnants of a natural, segmented existence. The streets of 17th-century Paris were dangerous labyrinths after sunset. The narrow alleys offered perfect cover for thieves and violent criminals. The city lived in fear of the darkness that swallowed its public spaces. In 1667, the French state decided to exert control over the night. Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie served as the Lieutenant General of Police. He launched the first systematic street lighting program in the capital. Thousands of oil lanterns appeared on the facades of Parisian buildings. The flickering light forced the criminal element out of the shadows. This was not merely a public service for the comfort of citizens. It was a calculated tool of the state to enforce law and order. The darkness of Paris was officially reclaimed by the authorities. Across the English Channel, London remained a city of deep, unpredictable gloom. Residents relied on private torches or the moon to navigate the streets. The city government finally acted in 1684 to address the safety crisis. Edward Hemming received a formal patent to illuminate the city center. He installed lanterns in front of every 10th house on moonless nights. The service operated from 6 p.m. until midnight during the winter months. This period spanned from Michaelmas in September to Lady Day in March. The lanterns provided a thin line of visibility through the dense fog. But to understand why these moments mattered, you need to see the shift in power. The night was no longer a private domain for the common citizen. It became a regulated space overseen by the police and the city council. The flickering oil lamps served as the eyes of the state in the dark. London and Paris transformed the night into a landscape of surveillance. Crime rates dropped as the visibility in the alleys increased. The state succeeded in imposing its will upon the nocturnal hours. But this artificial light carried a hidden cost for the human body. The natural rhythms of the night began to clash with the new order. The watch was soon viewed as an obstacle to this emerging urban efficiency. The era of the state-managed night had effectively arrived. A flicker of blue flame appeared in a small workshop in Redruth, Cornwall. It was 1792. The Scottish engineer William Murdoch held a coal-filled iron kettle over a furnace. He channeled the resulting gas through a series of long, rusted iron pipes. The gas emerged from a simple thimble at the end of the line. William Murdoch ignited the vapor, and a steady, bright light filled the room. This demonstration marked the end of the era of animal fat and whale oil. The transition from flickering wicks to pressurized gas was rapid and absolute. But to understand why that moment mattered, you need to see the factory floor. The owners of British textile mills watched the demonstration with intense interest. They saw more than just illumination. They saw the potential to harvest the night for profit. Before 1792, the rhythm of the factory was tied to the setting sun. Workers stopped their looms when the candles burned down to the nub. The night belonged to the natural cycle of the human body. The introduction of gas lighting changed the fundamental physics of the workday. Factory owners installed miles of piping throughout their massive stone buildings. They no longer relied on the fading glow of the evening sky. The gas lamps burned with a constant, unyielding intensity through the dark hours. The shift was not about safety for the citizens of London. It was about the total colonization. Workers found themselves under the glare of artificial light long after sunset. The natural transition to the first sleep of the night disappeared. The factory bell replaced the biological urge to rest. The watch, that ancient period of human agency, became a lost relic. The state and the employer merged their interests under the flame of gas. The night was now a workspace that never truly closed. The human body was forced to adapt to a continuous 8-hour sleep cycle. This was the death of the second sleep. The change was not a result of biology, but of corporate necessity. William Murdoch had inadvertently provided the key to the modern, exhausted world. The darkness of the pre-industrial age had been effectively commodified. Every hour of the night now held a price tag for the manufacturer. The limestone lamps of the Lascaux caves were a memory of a distant past. The gas lamps of the 19th century were the reality of a new, rigid era. The human experience was permanently altered by the invention of a brighter flame. The gas pipes snaked through the brick walls of London in 1812. The Gaslight and Coke Company secured the first commercial charter that year. London streets glowed with a harsh, flickering intensity for the first time. The amber haze of the gas lamp erased the natural transition of dusk. Factory owners monitored the clocks with a new, rigid precision. The darkness no longer signaled the end of the shift. Laborers worked under the mantle of gas until the early morning hours. The shift in lighting destroyed the ancient rhythm of the human body. The practice of first and second sleep collapsed under the demand for output. Historian A. Roger Eckert documented this profound physiological shift in the historical record. The 2 4-hour blocks of rest vanished from the diaries of the working class. The second sleep was a casualty of the industrial need for continuous labor. Workers arrived home exhausted and collapsed into a single, unnatural block of sleep. The human body struggled to adapt to this sudden, forced synchronization. The night belonged to the machine rather than the biological cycle. The factory bell dictated the wakeful hours of every man and woman. Medical texts from the era stopped referencing the watch as a standard activity. The quiet hour of midnight became a time of silence instead of socialization. The state and the employer successfully colonized the dark. The gas lamp acted as a tool of total temporal control. The transition from the limestone lamp to the gas line was complete. The ancient, segmented rhythm of human life became a memory of the past. The modern, exhausted world was forged in the heat of a gas furnace. The cost of industrial progress was the loss of the second sleep. London remained awake long after the sun descended below the horizon. The artificial light created a permanent, buzzing state of modern productivity. Humanity moved into an era of continuous, regimented existence. The era of the watch ended with the steady hiss of the gas jet. The limestone lamps of the Lascaux caves sat abandoned in the damp earth for 17 millennia. These carved stones were the first tools of a species learning to conquer the dark. Animal fat burned slowly within those shallow basins to guide the hands of early artists. The transition from that primal flame to the industrial gas jet was a journey of total environmental control. Edward Hemming, in 1684, installed lanterns that mapped out the streets of London for the first time. Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie filled the alleys of Paris with thousands of oil lamps to extinguish the shadows of crime. The night, once a wild and untamed expanse, became a surveyed territory of the state. The human body struggled to reconcile these changes with its deep, inherited biology. A. Roger Eckert found the proof of this struggle in the discarded diaries of the working class. Tobias Venner wrote in 1620 that the pause between the two sleeps was a natural necessity for the mind. The Industrial Revolution finally broke that ancient, segmented cycle. William Murdoch ignited his gas demonstration in 1792 and paved the way for the continuous artificial day. The factory bell replaced the biological urge to rest. The second sleep dissolved into the relentless hum of the 19th century machine. The darkness was commodified, measured, and sold by the hour. The modern world was built upon the ruins of that stolen time. You sit in the glow of a screen that never flickers, just as the factory owners once demanded. The night you think you own is merely a relic of the system that erased your ancestors' rest. You are the final product of that long, artificial harvest.